interesting, Pauline, when you know that people from all around the world are reading your books in their language?
I mean, I find it fascinating. Stephen's just said about Japan, and my books are, a couple of them are translated into Chinese, and Chinese publishers just bought the whole Andy Horton series, which they're publishing the end of this year and next year. And you know, I'm thinking, what do they make of the Solent, and what do they make of this area? And of course, like you say, when they read them in the middle of the desert in Arizona or wherever it is, miles away from what you've created, and whether they actually realise it is a real place or not. But yeah, no, it is fascinating. And I'd just like to say that it's also interesting what Matt and Stephen are saying about the background, because I too always wanted to be a writer. It mirrors exactly your backgrounds, in that I wrote my first novel when I was 11.
Beat me.
Yeah, I'll beat you. I'll beat you. I thought I was going to be the next Enid Blyton then, because I loved her. But always writing. But of course, you didn't make a living out of writing then. It wasn't a career, certainly not for you know, somebody like myself. And I decided I'd either wanted to be a journalist or an author. But I ended up in PR. Probably paid better than journalism, actually, but it was always a career, marketing and PR, that I was involved in writing and meeting deadlines and having to edit. And I think what Stephen said, it is good discipline. And most of us here, the three of us here, it took us a long time to get published. And despite what you read, you know, you don't write a novel and get published the next year. It does take a long time, doesn't it? I think humour's also, you use it depending on your character as well, and there are different, as we all know, there are different types of humour, and you've got different types of characters, so the characters will also have their own form of humour, so that the humour that you use has to fit that character that you have created. Likewise, the language, you know, you will have some characters that will swear and other characters that won't, so as in real life. So that, yeah, I think humour's good. I like a little bit of humour in it. And my book's published in America as well, so you know, you do get comments there about understanding the humour. Yeah. Obviously I pick up that kind of humour that they have, the things, you know, that Robert would say to me, how they dealt with, you know, scraping somebody off the railway line. You know, it is somebody's relative. It is the black humour that, yeah, I do think you have to put in a book, but I don't know about Matt. You know, it is, humour's quite difficult sometimes to put in, though. It's quite a difficult skill, isn't it? Yeah, I read, I always read, every day. Crime fiction, great crime fiction fan. Since becoming a published author, I find it more difficult to read my contemporaries' crime novels because I'm always looking at it from a writer's point of view rather than a reader's point of view. And I don't want to be influenced on my own novel that I'm writing by somebody else's. So I tend to read a lot of the golden age of crime novels, but anything Colin Dexter, Reginald Hill, R.D. Wingfield, I love them all.
I was interested to read that Pauline says when she isn't writing, which isn't often, She can be found walking the coastal paths on the Isle of Wight and around Langstone, Portsmouth and Chichester Harbour, looking for good spots to put a body. You wouldn't kind of say that public, would you, if you were out walking? But again, you've chosen a very different landscape, but it's a landscape that you know because it's one you've grown up in.
Yes, yes, coming from the area and having lived in the area for a long time, I do know it very well, warts and all. We know, but it's quite interesting, listening to Matt and Stephen, because one of the things that Stephen said about the contrast between the Peak District and the cities. I particularly like the contrast that we have here between Portsmouth inner city and then the Solent, the beautiful Solent, which is our landscape. It's vast and it's so vibrant and it's one of the busiest ports in the world. And the contrast between Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight. So I like that inner city contrast with the countryside and with the sea. So I found, resonate with what Stephen was saying there. And I was just thinking when Matt was talking about having never been to America, and you set your books in America, and I was just thinking, Google Maps is very useful, isn't it? Very good for an author, because when I haven't been anywhere, one of the advantages is, of course, that, like Stephen, I live on the patch and I can walk the streets and I can research very easily without getting on an aeroplane. I can get on the ferry, the Isle of Wight ferry, of course, but I can research the locations, and there is so much around here that gives me inspiration. There are so many bays and harbours and coasts and history again, like you were saying. The history goes back a long way. So there's a lot to draw on. The challenge every time is to write a new book, and I'm now writing number 10 in the Andy Horton series with 2 thrillers behind me, so I'm at 12 again. And it's giving the readers what they like, because they like your style and they like the format and they like the characters. But of course you have a new crime, but it's actually how do you make it different as well? And then also actually having to bring in the backstory, because you never know if somebody's going to pick up book number 5 or book number 12 and suddenly discover you. And then they'll think, oh, well, you've got to give them enough of the backstory so they can read that book. But you can't explain it all again because it would be too boring. So that's especially if you've got a continuing thread through your novels, like I have with Andy Horton trying to find his mother. So, but there again, that's part of being a writer. That's what we do. I think keeping track of all the details, it does get a problem as the more novels that you write, and you do need very good copy editors because you get very close to it as well, and you can't see the holes. But having just spent a couple of days copy editing my latest one, which comes out next January, I discovered, because again I've probably had about several different copy editors and editors, so they do change, but I was just copy editing this, I was just about to sign it off, and I thought that name sounds familiar, I'm sure I've used that name before, and I went back to another novel and I used exactly the same name for a different character. So it was a bit of a nightmare. But what I do is I keep a database now of the characters' names that I've used, and I keep track of the main characters' backgrounds, their life histories, their stories, and that's built layer upon layer as the series progresses. So I'm quite sort of thorough in my my planning and my plotting and my sort of keeping of character details, as thorough as I can be. I think researching certainly has opened my mind. I like the element of research, and I like finding out things. So I've certainly since I've written my crime novels and thriller novels, I've certainly learnt a lot more, and speaking to the experts, actually being able to pick the phone up to them and email them and talk to them, both Hampshire Police and the university lecturers are absolutely fantastic. And even here today, you just, that's, being a crime writer has opened my mind, yes. mean, I like the puzzle as well. I like the psychology, and I like the puzzle to solve, very much the puzzle, and I like the kind of structure as well of a crime novel, that you know something happens in a crime novel and a thriller. It's not like a literary novel, which, you know, you could read 100 pages and nothing happens. So, which is great, you know, if you like that kind of book, but I like a book to read and to write where something's happening. There's a lot of action going on. In the psychology behind people, what makes people do the things they do, you know, the lies that people tell, and the sort of image that they have of themselves. You know, I always used to say, used to study psychology and lecture in psychology, and you think you're normal. To you, you're normal, but what is normal? And how other people see us. We never see ourselves how other people see us. So I find that interesting. And I also think that having worked in marketing for many, many years, the ability of a good marketing person is to put yourself in your customer's shoes. And you may be marketing to an 80-year-old man or a 6-year-old child or whatever it is. You have to think like that person. So I think that was always quite good training. But one of the other things is that I always write from the male point of view. So my lead characters are always men, and I always write as a man. I don't know what that makes me, but a closet man. But you know, I am. Yes, I do go into Andy Horton's world, or even my thrillers. The two main characters, and that are men. But I think it's just finding your style. It's what suits you. And it takes a while as a writer to find your style. And I wrote many novels with female leads before I actually wrote Andy Horton. And then I wrote 2 thrillers and then went back to Andy Horton. And I thought, yeah, this is what I want to do. I live sort of I see the crimes and the solving of crimes through one voice. And that is Andy Horton's voice or my thriller character's voice, not through anybody else. No, I think we do all enjoy a good story. We need to be encouraged to find those stories. We need to be told those stories. And, you know, echoing what Anne said about libraries is I come from a household where there were no books. We didn't have books. Nobody in my family read books. And if it hadn't been for a friend's mother actually taking me to a new library in Tangiers Road, the Alderman Lacey Library in Portsmouth, I would never have discovered, or maybe not then discovered, the joy of reading Enid Blyton, of course, and then progressing from there. And as a child, escaping into a world that was so totally different from my own. There were these middle-class children going to boarding school. You know, what was this? This is outside my experience, you know. But you could. So, and that started with a library. So libraries are hugely important for those children, and libraries in schools are important, where children are not exposed to reading and to books, and because it improves obviously their language.